Yeah, on a scale of 1 to 10, how fond are you of avocados? I mean, you named your digital health company off the fruit. So I'm assuming, well, it's a fruit. So I'm going with an over under of about 7 at least.
It's I would give it an 11, just
And
to be
11.
conservative.
All right. All right. I think I won't disagree with that, but the fact that it's overpriced at Subway knocks it down a couple points. But listeners, welcome to How It's Med, the podcast where we chat with people shaping the future of health tech and med tech. My name's Jeff, and today we're chatting with the co-founder and CEO of AvoMD, internist, and ukulele player himself, Dr. Yair Saperstein. How are you doing, Yair?
Excellent. It's a pleasure to be here.
What's up with you? What's going on? We chatted like a couple months ago, and things have gotten in the way. But what's gone on in the past couple months?
Past couple months. So we have added on a lot more societies to our partnership, content partners. So we now have AAFP, AHA, KDIGO, and many others, expanded into different specialties as well within endocrine and others, so that we're really able to serve the needs of our users across those different specialties. We cover primary care with the AAFP ones, as well as hypertension, from the AHA. So everything that you now need to be there present is something relevant off the shelf to guide you as a clinician through your management and diagnoses pathways are now available. Anything that's not, we still have the builder. The builder has now been revamped so that it's even easier to use. We have clients that are now really building on their own to create their own custom pathways and be able to integrate it. And then talking about integration, we are now live and publicly listed in the Epic App Marketplace. And so for any and all users that want to use us within Epic, we are in other EHRs as well. But for those who are in Epic, it's super easy now. You could just download it from the marketplace to be able to use it. So they're some of the biggest advances that we've had since the last time that we spoke.
So TLDR, you're making it easier for physicians and healthcare, I guess, authorities and districts to help themselves and, I guess, spend more time practicing for the benefit of patients instead of just filling in paperwork.
You got it. It's automate the processes that are more difficult to be able to spend more time with your patient actually at the bedside and do it more properly.
Gotcha. So way back when we first chatted, you had mentioned to me that you grew up in a family of physicians. I can't imagine what that's like, the expectations and all the banter that goes back and forth. But tell me about the worst and best parts of that experience and how that shaped who you are.
Worst and best parts, feeling each other's hands and wrists and arms to try to figure out where we would stick a needle in if we had to stick in a needle, and could you do it with your eyes closed and possibly test it? Yeah, things that you do as a kid, not always the smartest. Not recommended. Don't try it at home. My mom's an anesthesiologist. My dad's an endocrinologist. So, it really came in there at the dinner table. Sometimes we would just talk about hormones and what happens if they go awry, and you can grow up with different conditions and what that's like. So super fascinating, really opened your eyes. But as a kid, when you're hearing these things, then you go around, you're like, well, I wonder if, that condition going on with that person is always something that over time becomes something which allows for sensitivity. And it's like, well, now I can really think about it and really address it, think about these on a system level. But as a kid, not exactly like that. It's more like, oh no, do I have this condition? Do you have that condition? Like, what's going on there? In a way that's sometimes that more doctor speak than your average hypochondriac.
That's fair enough. And I guess given all that familial context, did you try to rebel and go against the grain and step away from medicine? Or were you like, this is what I was born into. This is what I need to get into to fit into my family?
I was always like a systems person, right? So it wasn't necessarily that I would do or not do medicine directly, although there's, different points in my life. You ask me, what am I going to do? The answer was anything but medicine. But for the most part, it was really more of a systems approach. Like, how can I fix the systems that are there? Does that mean that I can go into policy and study policy to help address like the underlying regulations and policy that address medicine, which is my family. It doesn't mean that I can fix the issues in different ways, like think about global health and have that kind of impact. I've worked in like Israel, Uganda, US, and onwards within the in Peru, within the health systems. And so I have that kind of understanding of the health systems. And so like wherever it would be, there would be some kind of system addressing within the medical system and how it would affect it, because it was something that's personal. Not necessarily that I would go into med school and take the physician track to understand it, until it's like, can't fix the system until I understand it more deeply. I got to experience it. I got to see it. I got to feel it. I got to do it. So, that kind of led to that path.
Hmm. I mean, to fast forward a couple of years, like you've now like finished your MD, you're done your residency, and you ended up doing your MPH as well, which fits along exactly with what you're saying. But way back when, before you started all of that education, what were your first glimpses or attempts at building or understanding systems? Because I don't think that it's necessarily something that happens overnight. Rather, like you try and you fail, or you try and you succeed and you get hooked on it, right?
Yeah. So for me, let's see, in elementary school, middle school, high school, it's always like involved in a how can I help kind of a way. So not oh, I fix systems, therefore let me try to be involved to fix systems. More like, well, anything needs to be done, call on me. Let me see how I can help. So that meant like, being involved in school clubs, and then progressing like within my community. Like I always read the Bible for the community as a way of giving back. How can I serve? Fast forward a little bit more, and in college, started two nonprofits. One Start Science, the other was Teach for Kids. And both of them, co-founded both of them, took them to international scale, ran them. And they both started as sort of like something that just fell out, right? It was like, oh, there's a need. One of them was, there's a need for more science teachers in an elementary school that had a lab, but didn't have science teachers. I can go. Some of my friends can go. Sent out an email like, who else wants to volunteer with me? It's got 70 replies. Like, all right, how do we turn this into a program that we can actually serve and give back? And through those experiences, it's like, oh, wow, there's a way of really influencing and structuring systems that allow for overall improvement by thinking about underlying roots and how to solve it, rather than just this one individual problem. It's not just, oh, I can go. It's me and my friends can go and teach and set up a programmatic structure that allows for us to constantly teach science courses that was in one school, and then 5 schools out of our college, and then across colleges, and then across the US, and then across the US and Canada, and then, to a couple more countries, and so on and so forth, in a way that became scalable. So that was like the first part. And so by the time I hit med school, where we really started the second nonprofit and was doing more global health work and being involved from the system side on those, and then approaching residency, it's like, well, there's all these different problems that are going on here in residency too, that are like systemic. It's not something specific to this one residency program I was in. It's something which is about medicine. What can I do to help in a way that doesn't just solve my own need, but can also think about, well, I got all my friends too. How can we work on something together?
So what you're saying is that because, well, I've noticed that a lot of students who enter med school now have found a nonprofit or other, but you're the person who brought that entire trend on, and you're to blame for it being to being so hard to get into med school now, right? Trendsetter. Thank you.
I didn't do it on purpose. It really
Okay.
fell out. Not as a nonprofit that we started, but really as a program that only became a nonprofit once I was in med school.
Mhm.
As a way to take it further. So I didn't start that trend of starting a nonprofit before med school or make it that hard. It was an accident.
All right. I'll try to take you at your word, but we'll keep going. So I mean, med school, as you said, apparently wasn't busy enough for you. You ended up founding Teach to engage kids in hospitals with science. I mean, how did this initially start? You mentioned that you want to create a system so that, you'd have a mechanism to keep being involved in this, but how did it first start? What was the seed?
So I had a friend who actually pitched the idea to me, and I had already figured out how to build some of these systems by engaging different stakeholders that I was conversing with. So I was in the hospital, speaking with some of these people, and I pitched the idea to them, and they were like, "Yeah, let's go for it. Let's do it. That started at one hospital and in the inpatient playroom where we can basically send med school volunteers in to do hands-on science experiments and kind of guide these experiments so that the kids could, you know, build, milk fireworks or roller coasters to understand like more about potential and, potential energy and how it translates into kinetic energy. And it's like all the stuff is just hands-on fun where, it's like more recreation really than education, but it has this educational side to it so that it allows for that connection in a way that's positive.
Honestly, I'm just thinking about milk fireworks. How did that look like?
That's awesome. Check it out online, milk fireworks, and see if you can build it right after or during this call. I don't know.
I mean, I got to pay attention to what you're saying. That's just good interview etiquette. But I mean, okay, so on top, I guess on top of running, teach and start science, you ended up choosing I guess you didn't end up choosing residency straight out as your first choice, did you? You went through med school, you ran all these nonprofits, but last time we chatted, you had mentioned that there was a bit of a conundrum as to what you wanted to do after med school exactly, because you knew that it wasn't necessarily the direct path or the only direct path because you saw that there were other opportunities beyond just going from an MD into a specialty of your choice.
Yeah, I did a lot of exploration. I actually interviewed for a biopharma company, as part of that path, thinking, gave some thought to staying overseas and, continuing to work overseas, within global health, but just from the medical training before internship or instead of internship. And I gave a lot of thought also to like policy, ended up doing the MPH, along with that track of going through, formal training for internship and residency. But I thought about that as an alternate. And then gave a little bit of thought, but didn't really explore it at the time, the business world. And, it's funny that that's where it ended up, but thought about the VC world and, entering that with the ability to engage with a lot of different startups and a lot of different ideas and see what I could do to help. But I had no business training or thought at that time. So it was really something which was more unfamiliar and a harder jump at that time.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at that time, you'd already done some work with nonprofits, as well as, you had mentioned to me at least some research work in your undergrad, which lent itself well to at least a step off into biopharma. I'm kind of interested in that, possible step towards biopharma. That's not necessarily something that I'd expect someone straight out of med school to go for. Could you tell us more about, that thought process, what you went through, and why you ended up not choosing that as the option to go down and instead chose residency?
Yeah, I got a recruitment email from this pharma company that they're looking for somebody that understands the research side of medicine plus pharma, would be able to understand phase 3, phase 4 clinical trials, their implications, if it would be worth it to pursue those medications and to add them to the portfolio, but who also has the ability not just to understand it, but to call them, have a conversation with them, give them an offer, buy their pharmaceutical and the rights to it as part of that. And it sounded super engaging. It's like, can use the science part of the brain, can use the business part of the brain and learn something more. So it was really appealing. And that was definitely a strong consideration. I decided in the end that I didn't want to get stuck within that position without having different options and different understanding. And that in order to do that, I would rather complete the trail, even as I'm doing different aspects of this engaged learning, right? So it's like, I always think about what can I learn as I do different parts. Over here, it was like, well, what can I do? I'll definitely learn a lot more, but am I losing an aspect of my learning if I stop this path too short? It was a tough decision, but that was why I decided against it at that time. And to continue with internship residency with the MPH so I could keep expanding the learning aspect of, all right, well, I'm even more interested in policy, even more interested in like governance and how that works. I can still learn that as I do this path. So I can do the hands-on aspect of what medicine really is to practice, which I didn't do as much in med school because as a med student, when you're rotating, you have some of that in third year and fourth year. But as an intern and resident, you really have it more.
Mhm. What perspective did the MPH give you that residency and med school didn't?
Uh, Very much contrast between uh, a patient who was showed up in the ER and said, "My doctor told me to come to the ER because it's the only way that I can get my MRI because otherwise insurance won't cover it." And the MPH, well, we need to set up structure to allow for our ballooning healthcare costs to not be ballooning by having everybody informed and these measures tracked, so that everyone is engaged and won't be doing this. And I'm in the middle of it. I'm learning from these attendings what to do, right? And there are certain cases for it. Then on the other side is like learning from the MPH program of what we should do. But you need to cross that bridge and bring the two together. And so it's really cool to have both of them at the same time, like bring discussions from one into the other in a way that was practical and, you know, hands-on common sense when you're in practice. And on the other side, like the intellectual thoughts of policy and where we're going to go with it, informed by the, like what's actually happening on the ground. So it was super.
Yeah. And I mean, just to have both those perspectives as you closed up your residency when COVID started must have been a really interesting time, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, COVID was war. COVID was war. So I was chief resident during COVID, like in charge of like 400 providers, their schedules, orienting them to what's happening, making sure that they got masks, setting up like a student group that would be able to call family members, to keep them informed of what was happening. It was like, it was an emergency, right? So you have to do there was no more like, well, you know, this person is not trained for it and therefore they shouldn't do it. It's like anybody that you can bring in to be able to help should work. Bring in the pediatricians and the ortho guys to help out in internal medicine because there's too many patients. But how do I teach them what they need to know as the chief resident who's the liaison for that part? So it was like really thinking about the practical with the, well, what should we do on an intellectual setting? It's like, well, we got today to figure it out.
I guess what were the long-standing ramifications of that all-out, quote, like essentially war effort? Because yeah, you're right. You're absolutely deploying resources that like in settings that otherwise would not be deployed in those settings. For example, an orthopod in ICU, right? So
Right.
like has there been any, I guess, leftover change or I guess, have there been any leftover ramifications of the implementation of such policies? And have there been any lessons that have been taken away by medicine units in and why like in New York that you've seen so far?
I mean, for me, like when I finished up my chief residency period at Kings County as part of the downstate program, I then went to Mount Sinai in a like part-time nocturnist role. So I really didn't see so much of what happened after. I was still in touch with some of my war comrades, you know, as you always stick with your army buddies, to find out, well, what's happening now, you know, how's it going? What kind of fallout is there and how are people still together? Like, you know, there's obviously a difference, but I remember thinking at the time, like New York strong after 9/11. It's like everyone comes together. That's what happened. It was like everyone came together. How do you pull it off successfully together? And that was eye opening. It was like, wow, everyone's here to help. Cool. Like, let's
Mhm.
do it. On a personal way, you know, it helped frame my thoughts on how can you ensure that there's up to date information in a way that is usable practically by whoever needs to use it. And that helped color some of what we're doing at AVO.
You you set up the segue, but I was going to ask another question, so I'll ask the question first, and then I'll segue. Um, so I mean, like other than your like work during the COVID-19 response, what was the I guess achievement that you were most proud of during your residency? Because I know that there was quite a bit that you accomplished during that time.
Let's see, achievement. I'd say top three, um, is number one, setting up the wellness committee for the internal medicine program, which eventually became the university wellness committee, to be able to give the residents a voice, and included in that is residency newsletter, being able to have a written voice, a way to come together, a way to engage with the administration and actually get funding for the programs were that we wanted to do. And the administration was super responsive to it. So, I think I'm proud of being able to get everybody together to accomplish that. That's one. Second was during chief residency year, Epic implementation. So I was the informatics liaison from the resident side for the Epic implementation, meaning I wrote the note templates that became the standard and, really had a hand in. And also over here, it's like very proud of my contribution to it and really grateful to the CMIO of Kings County and to everybody else for teaching me along that path as it continued. And then the third is really COVID and the COVID efforts and being able to figure out, again, with everybody else, how to come up with a schedule that worked. Like we shifted it into 8-hour schedules because people were getting burnt out from the 12 hours, and how to revamp really all the systems that we did in a way that could function, how to set up things in advance, like installing baby monitors when we saw that COVID was really coming so that people didn't have to go into the rooms and get themselves sick, or establishing, I think we were the first work from home program ever established for physicians in this way over at Kings County and downstate. And, the first to set up, how can you be a part of the team and help out in a way that's remote so that we have people that aren't sick that can still contribute to the efforts that we were doing. So thinking through those and actually setting them up is, I guess, my third proud achievement together with the teams that were there.
I mean, items 1 and 3 were either directly or mildly indirectly linked to wellness. Why is wellness and well-being of physicians, healthcare providers such an important aspect, or why was it such an important aspect of your residency activities?
You've seen the news, like physicians get burnt out,
Sure.
doctors commit suicide, nurses do also. Like it's not when you're in it and you get it, it's like, it's not the best culture. The practical clinical medicine is really not the best culture. And so it's like, you don't want to be a part of that culture and get sucked into it. And you don't want to be removed from it. You want to change it into something which is positive. And that can mean many different things. It could be like having a smile, right? It could be installing wellness light so that people don't get seasonal affective disorder. It can be like establishing a suicide hotline for when it is too late. It could be setting up trips that you can go skiing together as a group so that you can bond together with everybody else. It's like, there's a lot of different aspects to it. And some of it, like we were learning, we were one of the first to do it back in the day. And it's like, it's just from the feeling, like you want to be able to help and support everybody. So how do you do that?
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think that there's plenty of reasons why that should, or those activities should have been focused. And I think that a lot of the residents, the healthcare workers overall, probably are super thankful for, all that you did during that time. To take a step forward in the conversation then, you had mentioned that the COVID response, helped build your inspiration towards, I guess, building the idea or what became AvoMD. But you also had that information technology role in the conversion or adoption of Cerner. Those steps keep scrolling further and further back. When really did your interest in digital, digital health, or I guess information management in medicine start up? Was it that, adoption of Cerner, or was it the COVID response? I'm not exactly clear on that.
Yeah, the Epic implementation did help. And it helped like color the way that it would happen. But this is definitely in progress before the Epic implementation. As even in college, like I was involved in this Microsoft design team to be able to help make a better keyboard that would not have keyloggers that could get into it, and put together a team to be able to build this for Microsoft, and competed. We actually won first place user choice back in the day. And so it was like always a thought of how do you combine technology with a way of improving these systems. Fast forward to residency, with I helped install a new Wi-Fi system, helped with the two-way communication system across different hospitals. I was always involved over here. I had an advisor, Isabel McFarlane, who told me that what I'm doing is called clinical informatics and that I should go check it out. So at her suggestion, got an elective at Columbia's Department of Biomedical Informatics. And it was like a survey elective, right? So I met everybody who was working there. One of the people that I met there happens to be PJ. And PJ told me about this cool app that he's building, where he can input like algorithms into an app and then have it displayed. And that's what became Avo. So it really started from this like theme of, oh, computers can be used to help solve everything, right? Obviously. And then technology and its implementation into um, medicine is very much needed because medicine's behind the rest of the world and how it's adopting medicine and how it's adopting technology. And so there's a lot of room for improvement, whether it's because of regulation or because of resistance to change. Otherwise, probably some kind of combo. And then it's like, all right, well, let's check out informatics. Thank you to Dr. McFarland. And then, yeah, this is it. And so then I really had to think about, well, do I want to go for an informatics fellowship formally for training? Am I going to learn on the job over here? Like, this is my dream to kind of run a health tech company. Spoke to a good 30, 40 people in making that decision. And, as that part went, it was, this is my chance to live a dream, like maybe fail fast, maybe make lots of little failures and then continue to grow. And obviously there were pivots and failures along the way, which helped. But it was the chance to live a dream versus going into the formal fellowship, which was more structured. And at that point, it was like very different than my internship residency decision. It was like, this stuff I can study on my own. I can implement it. I can still do it. I can still learn. I don't need the formal like structure in this case. And so I ended up taking the boards separately after, learning the informatics that was needed for it, rather than going through that fellowship program so that I can live this dream.
That was really well thought out. And I think that reflection that you've done in terms of the different steps that led you up to the point that you're at is super interesting. But speaking of reflecting, can you now summarize can you summarize the purpose of the product of all that reflection, which is, AvoMD? Can you summarize what AvoMD does as you would explain it to a 5-year-old in only monosyllabic and bisyllabic words?
So let's see. No code. So you don't need to use programming language to be able to contribute to building it. This means that for health systems, you can take your pathways and put them into the hands of your clinicians in a way that standardizes care, where your clinicians can access effectively something that's like up to date in MD Calc format, but can be edited almost by using SurveyMonkey, right? So it's really like a combination of those three ideas. And so for health systems, we're standardizing care. For providers within these provider organizations, we're making care more efficient and more effective because we can produce notes for you as you go through these pathways. We can do lab interpretation for you. We can help you with diagnosis and management, right? Anything that you need at the point of care, pre-filled prior auths, right? Any activity that you need to do, it can help you and therefore save you time. For societies, the ones that are producing these 150-page guidelines that are supposed to help people figure out what to do with whatever.
I read all of that.
Yeah. I think you're like 99% of the world also that reads all of this. No, it's okay. No one does, I think, except for me. Like even some of the guideline authors tell me like, yeah, I didn't read like the final version. It's just too long. It's like, I get it. It's like, so how do you make that usable? Right. So you work with us also to be able to actually make that usable for these guys. And then finally, life sciences. So the guidelines have drugs that are already inherent as standard of care. It already has medical devices that are inherent as standard of care. And once it's produced by the societies in our format, it's blocked, it's sealed, it's done. And so that means that if life sciences want to help distribute it, it's almost like they're just giving out the guidelines themselves. And that's totally fine. It's not like they're creating it or making it have their drug in it or anything like that. There's nothing nefarious. So that's allowed us to give that value now to life sciences to have a compliant way and an effective way to get their drugs and medication and their medical devices to the point of care, to the physicians, to the nurses, to the clinicians that are there at the bedside in the clinic, and actually have it as part of the pathway when it is standard of care already. So that's kind of the value of Avo. And in a word or in a sentence, it's a no-code platform for clinical decision support apps.
I understand the value that Avo brings because there's like I just came off cardiology and there are so many different, I guess, guidelines for different presentations. So for example, someone came in with a pacemaker and ICD. Like I haven't studied that. I don't know exactly how to manage that, but for a fellow, you have to know everything. And those guidelines change sometimes as devices evolve, et cetera. So to be able to update them, live and to not have to read through a 150-page guideline is super helpful. But again, I don't know what kind of 5-year-old you're speaking to.
Mhm. Talking to a 5-year-old that has been there. I'll give you my pitch for a true 5-year-old.
Okay.
It goes like this. You use a phone, right? And when you use a phone and you're trying to figure out something, you have the option of using like 10 different apps to do it. That means you have to go and download it and go through all these things, or you can click into one app that has everything that you need. Not only that, but that one app that has everything that you need, you can actually change little things in it to make it sure that it has everything that you need, no matter where you are. If you're in one place or a second place or a third place. Now, obviously, we're talking about making medical decisions, being a better doctor. You can be that better doctor now by having it because you're just empowered to practice at the best level of your 5-year-old self. So we're basically solving this problem for you of needing to download all these disparate apps. I shouldn't use the word disparate, but all of these different apps. And now you don't have to. It's all there together for you in a way that'll work for you.
Mhm. Yeah. And I mean, to compare it to what I think a 5-year-old would do, think of being able to buy like Robux from inside the Roblox app and not having to go to your mom's credit card to put in the numbers, but actually being able to do it without having to tell your mom. It'd be so much easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, okay. So going off from that point, you've started to build a pretty amazing product that has been adopted, as you said, by different policy societies, by different, healthcare providers and systems. But what's been your greatest struggle in identifying, articulating, and then building solutions to the problems that you've seen? Because, I mean, I'm pretty sure that you didn't start out from ground zero being able to articulate the problems and solve the problems as you are right now.
Yeah. I mean, when we started, it was not a company. It was me and PJ building my algorithms that were based on the society's algorithms into his mobile app. And I did it through a Google spreadsheet that he niftily put together that can translate into this Swift app that was only on iPhone. And we put it up on the App Store so that other people can use it. And then it's like, well, it's useful for us. It's useful for our friends. How do we really get this out? Let's start with health systems, right? Give it to like different hospitals, different programs, different clinics to be able to standardize care internally, meaning they're going to have to build everything that they want into the builder. Now, back then, the builder wasn't quite no code like it is now. We called it no code, but it was more low code. Not that it needed any programming language, but it was a learning curve, right? So it was no code. It was just a harder to use no code. Now it's very simple. And so back then it was like, well, the health systems were struggling with building their own pathways into it. And so they asked us if we can help, which means that we had to get a builder team to be able to help. And we didn't want to be services. We wanted to be a technology, right? A SaaS platform, something that stands for itself, something that anybody can use. So it was like, well, how do we scale that up? That's what led us to the societies. It's like, if we're going to have to help them build, let's do something that works on a national scale. And make customization easier than building. So let's do that. Right. And you see, there's like little changes along the way as we kind of figured it out. And, once we started working with societies, then it really meant, oh, we have a third party content provider. That's how we can work with pharma too, because pharma is not influencing the content. They're just helping us distribute the content. That's great. And so, a lot of it came out as we were going down this a little bit more of a winding path to where we are now, where we really allow for both. So any health system that wants to be able to use it and edit it can, using the builder. They can create their own if they want. Whatever they create can go into our library, so anybody else can use it as well. And then, working with the societies, that's also available nationally and internationally.
I think you had mentioned a really important point there about user experience. So like developing a health tech overall is, super user experience can or should be pretty user experience focused because the healthcare providers hand often don't have much time to learn how to use for example, catheter or another device a different way than that which they were taught before. But I guess for you, from your standpoint, what were some stories or examples that highlight the importance of user experience in developing AvoMD's product? Because, I mean, you probably didn't understand at the beginning as to what, I guess, intricacies were needed in total to make sure that healthcare, I guess, administrator could properly format the product for use by physicians all throughout the authority.
Right. So, I mean, we were always focused on user experience and then
Mm,
the understanding of who our user was and what that experience was that they were going through continually came to light. So, PJ, that's my co-founder that I always talk about within the context of product. He's really the product visionary. And so
okay.
when I joined him, it was like he was always focused on, well, what's it like, including for me when I first joined him. And then it's like, all right, well, let's talk to a lot more providers. Let's really do like user feedback and understanding and do like walkthroughs with Speak Aloud so that we can really, have them talk it out and understand what they're going through to get it more with EHR integration, without understand the user side. And at that whole time, and so, that was the beginning and we built this user interface that really worked. Like, anybody that tries out Avo is like, oh, this is the way it should be, right? The thing is, we didn't think of our user as the builder. We thought about our user just as the one who's at the point of care. And so we didn't give as much focus to, well, how are people interacting with the builder? And how does that work for them? And when they create it, what's their experience like? And that became a later focus. And so, over that later focus, it's, well, let's understand the builder experience too. And let's get feedback and same kind of methods for understanding the user journey and the user experience with that software to be able to improve it. And through that feedback, it's like, okay, now we have the new version of the builder that's out and constantly iterating. So there will be another version that's even better to be able to account for that experience as well.
But how difficult was it to get the sample size that you needed in order to get the data points to make your UX like solid?
Not hard, right?
Really?
When you're when you're thinking about it, it's like, if you know the people that you're serving and you know the needs, right? Part of it is like personal. It was like, this was a problem that I had. And when we started we weren't solving other people's problems. We were solving our own problems independently and then came together to solve it. And so originally when we put it up on the App Store, we got tens of thousands of downloads. It was a shock to us. We were pleasantly surprised. It was like, whoa, other people also need and like this. Let's see if we can build a version for Android that also can take in from a no code builder instead of just a Google Sheet. And as we go through this process, let's see if we can fine tune it by actually understanding other people's experiences. So we weren't starting from zero. We were starting from our own needs. And then like, I had all the doctors I could ever ask for and more around me to be able to give their feedback and their experience with it from both a user interface and experience kind of way, as well as an overall idea. Talking to family members, friends, mentors, colleagues, students about like, what do you think? Tell me what you think by email, writing, watching them as they went through it. Like formally, we did some formal usability studies as well in conjunction with Columbia and Englewood. And so over there, it's like, well, we wanted it to be statistically significant to be able to understand a little bit more. So like, yes, to be able to publish and understand and put it out in a way that's formally documented. Sure. And so we did. But to be able to get the experience and be able to build quickly, it's like, no, you iterate, learn, build, and then repeat.
That's super interesting. Yeah. I mean, the reason why I asked that is because you're recounting kind of not pales, it contrasts with the experience that one of our previous guests, Josh Landy, his experience of choosing not to test within his own healthcare circle, but rather to just rely on users which were climbing on board naturally. So, I mean, it's interesting that you chose to go the path of involving those all around you. And I wonder, just side by side comparison, how that affected the growth of the different companies versus what risks were inherent in each method.
Yeah, it's a good thought, and doing like a retrospective analysis of it could probably be useful for people. I remember reading an article, I think it was put out by A16Z about how to think about the need for like user feedback and user testing and the like, and some other aspects that were within it. And like, it was a panel discussion with a bunch of others. And they basically were saying, look, it's important and you have to do it, but there's no one way to be able to do it. So it's probably parallel over here. It's like, you have to get user feedback. You have to
Yeah.
understand the problem. If you're just building a product in a vacuum, like it's going to
You're not building for
fail.
anyone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to fail because you're not going to get it to anyone. No one cares. It's like, that doesn't mean that it won't work in a bunch of years, right? It doesn't mean that it won't succeed eventually. Like, there's this book, Build, which is written by the guy that built the iPhone. And back when he started, it's like, he talks about how he was building the greatest product ever, but for no one. And that failed. And it's like, you learn along those failures, and better if you can learn from books than learning from experience. That if you don't engage the people that you're trying to build for and understand what they need, it's not going to work. At the same time, people might tell you something that they think that they need, or they don't really even understand it. And so if you watch and learn, try and learn, right? You can do A/B testing and put it out and see, like, as long as you're set up in a way that if you fail, you as a person won't fail, or you as a company won't fail, and you allow for those failures to be growth, then you can learn in whatever way is best.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds fair. I guess to spin away from the topic of AvoMD, I noticed that you've also done quite a bit of work in advocating for healthcare workers to expand their horizons and explore their interests beyond direct clinical care. Why do you do this?
It worked for me, and I want people to be able to get that benefit too. It's my world has definitely opened by being involved in different aspects, more than just clinical medicine. In clinical medicine, I felt almost like a cog in a wheel. There was no control, no ability to give feedback, no ability to discuss. Whereas over here in the roles that I have now, like, I'm a part of the conversation. Doesn't mean that I can do change, or that in my clinical role, I necessarily have that part. But for me, I feel more whole. I feel like I can have a broader impact, a broader positive change, and I have that fulfillment. And I want people to be able to feel that and be able to have that as an aspect. And so, as my way of giving back, it's like, I definitely want to do advocacy in any way as possible for anyone that's exploring alternative careers in medicine at any point in their career. And to be able to arm people with the fact that it is possible, any of the resources of people and networking that can help with it, and any other resources that help within exploring different options, like, count me in for all of it.
Mhm. And I mean, just thinking back, you've managed to succeed to by most definitions of in your pursuits beyond clinical care. But if you hadn't gone down this path, where do you think you would have went to quench that hunger to be heard, to manage systems, and to affect change beyond directly laying hands on a patient?
Many different places, like startup life for this, for AvoMD is one that I'm doing now and most actively, but there's the nonprofit world in, as it relates to clinical and global health, as it relates to some of the teaching and education organizations. There's teaching and tutoring in general. For me in particular, there's Bible studies and Talmud studies, where I do some teaching, some personal growth within it. Super into different competitive exercise based sports. So whether that's running, biking, and so on. So there was a time that I thought I would go into that a little bit more seriously. Yeah, open, and I don't even think it's one. I think, as in contrast to the previous generation that more thought about jobs with stability and, oh, you do this job and this is what you do for life until you retire. And I think our generation thinks more about jobs as, you do something that brings you fulfillment, where you can bring positive change that really works. And so that doesn't necessarily mean one thing that you do for 50 years. It can mean something that you do for a year, 2, 3, 4, 10, and then change and morph as it becomes fulfilling or not, or something else that works. So, I think
Mhm.
as themes, not being locked into something, finding things that are fulfilling and engaging and being willing to explore.
I mean, I've noticed there that you mentioned optionality in some different phrasing twice already, but I've discussed that prior. But one thing that I do want to ask that about what you've said just now is why choose? Why should someone choose the startup route versus a nonprofit or a global health route? Like, what are some reasons beyond the fact that when you were in the place that you were, you managed to meet PJ? That in itself was luck to some extent, was it? Or I guess to put it real simply and to avoid the rest of my word salad, um, what specific factors do you think, or would you generally think, would drive someone towards or away from the startup world when looking for non-clinical ways to engage with the world?
Yeah. So startup world, uncertain. You're dependent on people actually paying for what you're offering in some way, because that's how you survive, right? It's not grants, which you do in the nonprofit world. Um, Now, I do want to take a step back. Startups can mean for profits or nonprofits, right? So I'm thinking about it in the way of Ava, which is a for profit.
Mhm.
Um, Within both, you have the ability to do good. In for profits, you can do well at the same time, right? So that might guide you towards that if you have a financial component that you think about. Within both of them, you really can have a broad impact in what you do. And, thinking about both of those regions, I actually add a third, which is, I thought about working for Google or Apple or Microsoft or Amazon, like going into one of these big tech companies or one of these larger companies. And it's like, always think about what can you learn. So like as you do it, right, you want to further your education because that can bring you fulfillment. And so it's like, well, what can you learn in each of them? And you don't have to do one or another. You could do one, switch and try out another, or, find the people that you want to learn with and from. So it depends where they are. Even more important than being in a nonprofit or for profit or a startup or a large company is who are the people that you're going to work with? What are the things that you're going to do and how can you learn doing them?
Just to wrap conversation because we're reaching the end of our time. I mean, I know that AvoMD is the biggest thing that you're working on, but what are the best ways that someone who's listening can support you and the work that you're doing to better the world of healthcare now?
So one way is if you have ideas that I don't think of, just reach out on LinkedIn, Yair Saperstein. Feel free to reach out in any other time, any other way. So Twitter, email, through the AvoMD website. And then for specifics of ways to support, it's broad. We're looking for ways that we can continue to bring value within the AvoMD context. And so that means health systems, clinics that would be interested from the provider org side, any life sciences, so pharma or med device companies that would be interested from the distribution and funding side, any societies that have content that they're looking to actually get into physicians' hands at the point of care. Happy to have those intros. So that's from a networking perspective. From a personal fulfillment perspective, as I mentioned, I love to be able to coach, mentor, speak to anybody that's within clinical that's thinking about alternative careers. So would definitely be able to work in that sense too, to be able to speak with anyone on that front.
One last question, and I'll definitely edit this in post. How are you dealing with the regulatory barriers around working as a software as a service company in the health space?
So regulatory barriers mostly come with like anti-kickback laws and making sure that the pharma companies are not giving influence to the decision support that's there. And the way that we tackle that is because the content belongs to, is created by, and is stamped by the societies that create it. It's just distributing from the pharma side. And so pharma companies for sure can distribute whatever they want that's already been produced by the societies. For example, if they took the American Heart Association chest pain guideline, there's no issue with that. And so it's the same thing. Like for us, the most important is having the trust of clinicians and making sure that we are doing everything that's both ethical and legal in a compliance way, in a compliant way. And so, the pharma company does not have their drug that is endorsed or spoken about explicitly within the guideline that's added because they're sponsoring or anything of that sort. Or we're just giving them the ability to drop the paywall for everyone else publicly to actually access the society's guideline. So it's almost like they give a grant, just that the way that we treat it is it's our partnership with the pharma company for distribution. But effectively, it's just dropping the paywall for everybody else to be able to use the society's guideline.
That's fair enough. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for coming on to speak, Yair. I really appreciate it. This is How It's Med. You can find us on at howitsmed.com, and you can also find us on all the podcatchers that you listen from at How It's Med. Till next time.